Good morning. Glad you're here and glad you've made it. This morning has been chaotic around here, so we appreciate you being here. Appreciate you bearing with us. Couldn't find my mic just now, so that was kind of cool. But I don't know if you're one of those people who likes new things, if you like the new, if you always are up on new things. This year, 2017, is when we celebrate the advent of something that was new to the world, the first time that this thing was unveiled to the world. And that thing is called an iPhone. 10 years ago, Steve Jobs stood up in front of people, and he held up this device that looked like a rectangle and just kind of said, this is going to be the wave of the future. This is going to be what's going to happen to phones. And fortunately, some people decided to put their thoughts out like in magazines and in publications to a place where people could remember them forever. And they decided to say what they really thought about the iPhone right up front, right off the bat. And I'd like to read for you just a couple of those excerpts of what people wrote about the iPhone as soon as it came out. Apparently, none of you guys realize how bad of an idea touchscreen on a phone really is. I foresee some pretty obvious and pretty major problems here. I'll be keeping my Samsung A707, thinks. Color me massively disappointed, wrote one blogger. Another person in a magazine wrote, touchscreen buttons, bad idea. This thing will never work. Another person wrote, where is my FM radio? I don't know if that was a question about the phone or if it was just they lost their radio that day. I don't know how that worked. Another person wrote, I mean, it looks pretty, but it's not something I foresee being the next iPod for the phone industry. It took Apple how long to develop this one phone, while Motorola and Nokia release phones every few months and constantly innovate and get better? I'm sorry, but if I'm sending text messages, I'd rather have my thumb on a keyboard than some weird finger tapping on a screen. There you have it, folks. And sometimes new ideas, they're not well embraced and they're not things that we fully understand. We don't always love new ideas. Maybe you're one of those people. My kids are like that. I have Jane and Oliver, and yesterday we were at Replay Arcade. I don't know if you've ever seen this. It's in Tarpon Springs, and it's like a flat fee. You go in, you pay one price, and they have all these pinball and arcade games and all this stuff. It's awesome. And my daughter Jane, she would rather just do one thing forever than ever change it. And my son Oliver, he just wants to do all the things. He has what you call ADHD. And so he's pumped. He walks in, he sees all the things. Jane, she zeroes in on one machine. It's the only machine she knows, and she goes straight to it, and it's the original Super Mario Brothers. She sat there for about an hour playing just this original Super Mario Brothers, while Oliver would look at me the whole time and be like, Dad, can we play something else, please? Can we play anything else? There's all these games. And my daughter, she's one of those people, that's all she wants to do. She wants to play the original Mario Brothers. She's like stuck on that thing. And maybe that makes her either a really old soul or a really young hipster. I'm not sure what that makes her to play Super Mario Brothers that long. But she plays the original one. She's sitting at the arcade game. And Oliver wants to go see everything else. He wants to go play all the other things. He wants to try something new all the time. And maybe you're one of those people who you love the new stuff, or maybe you're one of those people who just dreads new stuff. You dread change. You dread new stuff. Maybe you're like that. And I think a lot of us are like that. If we learned anything from 90s pop music, it was that Semisonic taught us from their song Closing Time that every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end, right? We learned that from those 3-chord wonders, and they never had another hit. But that was their one song, and that's what they taught us. Every new beginning comes from some other beginnings, and something else ends, and we have to get used to the new. And that's where we find our heroes in the story today. That's where we pick up this story today. If you were here last week, we talked about the Israelites, and we were talking about Exodus, and the Israelites had been in slavery for 430 years. The Israelites had lived in slavery generation to generation to generation. They've been doing incredible manual labor. In fact, the pyramids that we credit to the Egyptians, those were done on the backs of the Israelites. They were the slaves that had to build those pyramids. They were doing literal back-breaking work as slaves for 430 years. They'd become accustomed to that. They become adapted to becoming people who were in slavery. That was the only life they knew. And God sends this guy named Moses to go pull them out of there, right? And he sends this guy, and Moses goes, and he talks to the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh doesn't like it, but Moses eventually talks him into it, and they flee from Egypt. And the Israelites, all of them, start moving together, right? And they run to this place called the Red Sea, and God parts the Red Sea. And the miracle that we usually look at is that they cross the Red Sea. But what we looked at last week is that the miracle may be that God closed the Red Sea, and that he said, no, you're in a new beginning, and this is where it starts over. This is a new life that I'm starting with you. It's a whole new thing. And so they've now crossed the Red Sea. God has closed the Red Sea. They cannot go back. If you weren't here last week, you can catch up on this online. You can see the sermon online. You can go to our website. Please don't do it now, but like at another time, you can go to our website and watch that. But it's one of those things where we look at that, and now they're in this new reality, and things have started all over. They're at ground zero. They have to start from scratch. A few years ago, about 8 years ago now, 9 years ago, my wife and I, Marie and I, we felt like God was calling us into something new, into a new place in our lives. And so I didn't know what that meant. I just knew I was supposed to look for maybe a different job or whatever. So I made this pact with God. I kind of made this fleece. I threw it out there. I said, you know what, God, if you want us to move, we were at this one church in Virginia Beach. So if you want us to move, I'm gonna find one church. I'm gonna find this one job that I want, that I think is the right fit for me. And I'm going to send out one resume to this one place, to this one job. And if they want us, then we're going to move. We're going to go. And if not, we're going to stay right here, and we're going to stick with where we're supposed to be at right now. So I put together my resume. I sent it out. And the place that I chose, was a place called Bellingham, Washington. It's about 30 minutes south of Canada. It's more South Canada than it is North America, really. It's way up there in the corner there. And I chose this place, and there was this one church, and I really had heard good things about it, but I didn't know anybody there. I'd never been there. I had no idea where it was even. And I sent this one resume, and God kind of answered this prayer. And someday I could tell you the whole story, but he answered this prayer. And he says, you know, I think this is the right place for you. And he sends us out there. We go visit this church. Everything's just amazing how he's lining things up. And so we took this leap of faith, and we're like, I guess we're going to move across the country. Now, my wife hadn't even crossed the Mississippi. She'd never even been that far west. I hadn't been further west than where I'd lived in Wyoming. And I'd never been to Washington State. We had no friends there. We had no family there. We knew nobody there. We had visited one time, and we made both of the friends that we were going to have. You know, we were brand new. So we get on a plane from Virginia Beach to literally cross the entire country. We have this little dog at the time, this 8-pound mutt. It was really expensive mutt. They made up a breed that's not a real breed. It was it was a Yestie or something. It was half Yorkshire Terrier, half Westie. But it really was just two dogs got together in the yard, and they just called it something to pay more money for. I mean, that's all we really had here. Let's not kid ourselves. This is not a fancy breed. This is a mutt. But we had this mutt that cost a lot of money, so we were taking this thing on the plane. So we get this thing on the plane. I swear, that ride alone took at least 8 to 10 years off of that dog's life. Not even in dog years. That's human years. That thing, it barely made it through the flight. So we get on this plane. We get to Atlanta. It's a messy situation. There's a big storm. We have to stay overnight at Atlanta. And then we get on the plane the next morning early, and we get to this new destination of Washington. We get into Bellingham, Washington. We fly in. One of the two people we knew picks us up at the airport. He's my boss, and he picks us up at the airport. He's one of the pastors of the church. He says, I've got a car that our senior pastor has, an extra car from that his mom doesn't use anymore, so you can use that. And he's like, so I'm going to take you from the airport straight to this car, and then we've got a house you can stay in. You're going to house sit for a family. So we're like, okay, cool. And so we go to this car. We get this car. We don't know where we're going. We've never driven around this town. And so we get in this car. We drive to this family's home. We get to this family's home. It's a family we've never met before. They're very nice people. Very nice people. We don't know them. And they have their own set of dogs. And these dogs are kind of crazy. And as soon as we get there, they open up. We walk in the door. We introduce ourselves. They're like, so you're going to be staying at our house? We're like, yeah, I guess so. They're like, okay, well, let's give you the instructions. And they go over to a binder. Literally, it's a binder. It's this 30-page front and back binder of how to care for their dogs, how to care for their plants, how to care for their neighbors, I think, how to compost things. I mean, it's everything you can imagine. It is so intense. So we start looking at the binder. We're like, what did we get ourselves into? And so we start looking through the binder. It's very overwhelming. The family's very kind, and they want to talk for a long time, but we're like so done. You know how this goes. You're just so tired. You're like, it'd be nice to just have some space, even if it's not in our house. So the family finally leaves, and my boss, he takes off, and it's just the two of us in the house with these dogs. And I go upstairs into the house, and I change clothes, and I come back down, and I see Marie sitting there on the couch. And she's sitting there it was the opening ceremonies of the Summer Olympics, actually. And she's trying to watch the screen, and she's sitting there, and she looks at me, and I can just see, this look where, like, there's something about to burst inside of her, and these tears are about to flow. And so I looked at her, and I just said, I'm going to give you 10 minutes. I'm not going to say a word, and you can cry as much as you need to. And I barely finished the sentence before it just started. And there was so much water, and it was like the snotty, nasty cry. I mean, it was like the real crying. Like, this is the real deal crying. This isn't like the kind, polite crying that you do, if a movie is slightly touching. This is a real deal crying. And she is now sitting on me. She's got snot on my shoulder. I'm holding her. She gets about 7 minutes in, and she stops. She actually starts to, and you try to kind of hit the brakes when you're crying, but it's very hard. And so she's and she looks at me, and I was like, you still got 3 minutes. And she went right back into it. She went right back into it and continued to cry out the rest of her 10 minutes. And from there, we moved on. But it was that moment where reality sets in, where it hits you. Like, we're in a new space. We don't know what we're doing. This is a completely new arena for us. We don't have friends. We don't really have our family. We don't really have anything to fall back on. Suddenly, we're completely independent, and it sets in how scary that really is. And that's exactly where these Israelites are. They've crossed a Red Sea. They've left the life they've known for over 4 centuries. And now they're going into something new, and they're terrified because they realize we have no idea what we're doing here. Primarily, you've got probably upwards of close to 4 million people, but at least 2 million people who have no economy. They have no way of making money. They have no structure they have no government, they have no societal norms, they have no background to even fall back on. All they've known is a life of slavery, and now they're free, and it's got to be terrifying. And so we pick up, this is in chapter 16, what happens is they leave this Red Sea moment, then the sea closes back in, all the Egyptians are killed, and then Moses and Miriam sing a little duet together. Moses and his wife, they sing this duet. I would picture it much like Islands in the Stream or Endless Love or something, except for the sensitive lines, substitute those with words literally like, Pharaoh, he sunk like lead in the ocean, and words like that. It's really uplifting stuff. All the Egyptians are dead. Hooray! So it's a love song like that, okay? And so they sing this duet together, they sing this song together, and as soon as that ends, as soon as that's over, it all sets in, and they realize really where they're at. The reality is setting in. And this is in Exodus chapter 16, and it says this. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted, but you have brought us out into this desert to starve, this entire assembly to death." Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way, I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions." So what he's doing here, he says, I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to provide for you. I'm going to rain down this bread for you. And then he says, I'm going to test you to see if you follow my instructions. Now, we think of God sometimes testing us in this way where it's like, see, if you don't do what I say, I'm not going to give you what you want. That's the way we see this. But what he's saying is, I want to test you to see if you will only gather enough for each day. I want to test you and see if you trust me enough to not stockpile, but trust me that every single day, I'm going to give you what you need. Can you imagine how terrifying, how disarming this is for a group of people who have known nothing but working for everything they've ever gotten for over 4 centuries? And God says, no, you're not going to work for anything. In fact, I'm going to provide for you every single day. I'm going to take care of you every single day. So he says, I'll take care of you. I'll provide this for you. I'm going to handle this. It's the first time that they've ever been cared for, not based on their performance, but just on their presence, just that they're there. They're finally being cared for just because they're alive, not because of what they can do for somebody. And God says, I'll care for you every single day. And then he goes into this next bit where he sets up this thing called the Sabbath, and he kind of alludes to it. He says, on the sixth day, they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days. He's setting up this thing called Sabbath. He's beginning a thing called Sabbath. And what he's saying is, you're going to gather up on the sixth day, you're going to gather up enough for 2 days, and I'm going to provide enough that you will have enough for 2 days, and you will not have to work on that Sabbath. Again, imagine how disarming that is to hear that you're not going to work for a day when all you've known is work. See, Sabbath is still something we struggle with. It's not just then. But Sabbath, if you don't know what that is, Sabbath is a day that God sets apart. Because we see in Genesis, when God creates the heavens and the earth, it says that at the end of creation, he rested for a day. He took a day off. And so he's implementing that into them. He's instilling that in them. And he's saying, I'm going to provide for you 6 days, and I'm going to mandatorily make sure that you stop working for an entire day. Because I'm not even going to give you food to go gather on that day. He takes that option off the table, right? So he says, I want you to get this idea of not working for a day. I want you to unplug. I want you to just take it easy for a day. I want you to rest in me for a day because I'm going to provide what you need. Now, this is a really weird concept for us, and I still think we still struggle with it. Now, for us, we do have weekends. We do have days off. We have the idea of vacation. We have these things that are normal for us. These Israelites did not have that. They lived in slavery every single day. They were not used to days off. They were not used to paid time off. They did not have vacation time. They did not have weekends. So for us, this is a little bit more easy to understand. For them, this was completely out of the norm. But we still have to learn, even with our time off, even with our weekends, even with our days off, how to fully disengage and let our God provide for us. We still have to learn how to do that. That does not come naturally to us. That's very difficult for us. One of the ways I think we deal with this more is not physical work, but I think we deal with this a lot through virtual work. I don't know if you've ever I don't know if anybody in here has an email address, for instance. We won't do a show of hands. I don't want to leave anybody out. But if you have an email address, for instance, it's very hard for us to disengage from the world. Actually, this is interesting. Email, the people that check their email more, there's a direct correlation between depression and people who check their email more frequently. People who check their email more frequently are more likely to become depressed. They actually have and their stress level goes way up. People who check their email more frequently actually live in more stress than those that check their email less frequently. And it's a system that's called a random reward system. That's what email is. We're not that different than rats. I was reading about this not long ago, but there's this rats thing. Yeah, there's a study done on rats. And rats, they did this thing where they set them up in this cage, right? And they put this little stand in the cage, and they had this lever that the rats could go over, and they'd push a lever. And the first time they push it, they would get food. They would get a pellet. A pellet would come out of the dispenser. And then every 100 times they pushed that lever, they would get another reward. They would get another pellet every 100 times. So they did a study like this to see how often the rats came back, and they came back quite a bit. And they liked it. They got their food every 100 pushes. But then they set up a separate dispenser, and the dispenser would sometimes give a pellet every 5 pushes, or sometimes every 500 pushes. Sometimes it was 15 pushes. Sometimes it was 1,500 pushes. It could be anything in between. And they would randomly dispense rewards. And you know which one the rats were more likely to go to? The random one. And they came back more and more and more frequently to the random one. They were looking for random reward. We do the same thing. We do the same thing through email because we're looking for that. Every once in a while you get that one good email where you're like, I got that Groupon. This is great. Or you get that email from somebody that you haven't heard from in a long time. You get that email that you wanted. You get that. Or sometimes it's a text that comes in and you see that little badge on your phone. And you cannot wait to get to that little badge and see what somebody has texted you. Sometimes it's your Facebook where you see that little red one pop up and you're like, I got to check this. Somebody said something. And then you check it and you're like, oh, it's just Candy Crush again. You know? I don't want to play Farmville. You know? Or you get that, but you check it because you can't wait to check it. But the more and more we keep doing those things, the more we enslave ourselves to those things, what actually happens is we get more and more depressed because we're not getting the reward we want. We actually become more and more sad by it. And God's saying, stop messing around with your random rewards and allow me to be your real reward, because I'm constant, I'm stable, and what you're used to is man-made random rewards. It doesn't matter what the reward system is, but when you're dealing with man, when you're dealing with other people, your reward system is always going to be random. You're always going to be dealing with people that maybe it's the kind words you were looking for just don't happen. Maybe it's the mean words that you weren't looking for happen from somebody. Maybe it's a raise that you thought was going to be something and it's not. Maybe it's just your paycheck does not reflect what you think you're worth. Maybe it's your title that you don't feel like fits who you are or what you're supposed to be. Random rewards always come with other people. People are unpredictable. And we put ourselves in this place where we're always looking for our value and we're always looking for our worth from other people. And God's saying you can't do that because that's going to be a random reward. Allow me to be your real reward and show you what you're actually worth. Rest in me and I will provide for you. But we keep searching for this random reward. And he sets up this idea of Sabbath, saying, take this whole day and stop working. Stop looking for that random reward, and I'll show you what the real reward is. So he starts to provide for them, right? He starts to provide, and we see this happen in the next chapter. He says this, I've heard the grumbling of the Israelites. At twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread, and then you will know that I am the Lord your God. Which if God still literally worked like this simply, it would be so different, wouldn't it? Like it was like, well, he just gave me bread and there was some meat on the ground and I felt really good about it. But instead we see roadkill and stuff and we're like, I don't know if that's God providing or not. It's a questionable situation. That evening, quail came and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. I picture these those little tablets that they look like little pills almost, and if you put them in water, suddenly they expand and they become like a sponge, like a dinosaur-shaped sponge. Or sometimes you get a bath towel. Have you seen that? Where you get a beach towel out of a little, which seems like, really, let's be honest, that technology seems way too advanced for how useless it really is. It seems like we should be doing something way cooler with that technology. But you know the ones, you put the little tablet in the water and it expands into something cool. That's what I picture happening here. There's these little tiny flakes, and when the dew hits it, all of a sudden there's this bread, this manna appearing on the ground. And when the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, what is it? For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, it is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. And he goes out with the people and he says this, everyone is to gather as much as they need. Take an omer for each person you have in your tent. An omer. Okay, so if you'll allow me just a really nerdy moment, if you'll allow me to just do this real quick. The math on this omer situation is staggering to me. So if we do simple math, I'm gonna just simply say, let's say in Genesis 12 verse 47, we see that there's 600,000 men. It says there's 600,000 men. It says that does not include women or children. Okay, so 600,000 men are Israelites. So we've got 600,000 men, not including women or children. Now, here's where the math gets a little tricky, but let's say for easy math, let's say we have 400,000 women. Okay, let's just say that. Now, it's probably way higher than that, but 400,000 women, just to make it an even million. So you've got 1 million men and women. Now, let's say, again, this is where the numbers can go way higher, but we're going to say conservatively. Let's say each family has 2 kids per family. Now, that's not likely in a society with no birth control and with multiple wives, just saying. But let's say they have 2 kids. That puts us at 2 million people who would be called Israelites. 2 million people in tents who need to gather up food. 2 million. The entire Tampa Bay area is 3.3 million. The entire Bay Area, I mean, all the way out to where we are right now. That Bay Area is 3.3 million, which is not a far shot to imagine that's where the Israelites probably were. I mean, it's that many people. So if you take an omer per person for, let's say, 2 million people, an omer per person, an omer is about 3 pounds. Which is a lot of bread per person, by the way. I don't know if they really didn't care about carbs, I guess. 3 pounds of bread per person. So you've got 2 million people at 3 pounds per person. So we are talking 6 million pounds of manna being delivered every single morning. Talk about it's cloudy with a chance of manna, for crying out loud. 6 million pounds of manna, right? So you got 6 million pounds. That's 3,000 tons. That's 3,000 tons of manna every single morning that God is dropping on the earth. An average train car, a box car, holds about 50 tons. So you're talking about 60 train cars full of manna every single morning falling on the ground. I'm glad he didn't just drop it from the sky, because I'm sure like a few people would have died if they stood under the manna. You know, like, how'd Grandpa die? Well, he was just too close to the manna pile, and it just all fell on him. 60 train cars worth every morning, and on the 6th day, he would deliver 120 train cars worth of manna to make up for the day that they would not go out and collect their manna, for the day that they could rest and stay in and not have to go gather. 120 train cars. 12 million pounds of manna on the 6th day. Like, when God provides, he doesn't just like do a little bit. He doesn't just say like, I'll just get you by. He goes for it. He gives them all they could possibly need and then some. And he tells them, on the 6th day, I'm going to give you twice as much. So he gives them twice as much, and this is just, I'm not going to go into this deep, but this is just really funny to me, that he gives them twice as much. There's 12 million pounds of manna on the ground, and so they take that in for the next day as well. So they eat what they have that day, and then they keep it for the next day. And it says that they still have what they need for the next day, and still the next day, when it's the day they're supposed to be resting, people still went out to go look for more. Like, do you not have enough manna? There was 12 million pounds yesterday. I think we're good. But people still went out the next day because old habits die hard. And he's still trying to get Egypt out of the Israelites. And so they still go out and search for manna. But God provides in this huge way. And then he says to them, it says this, each morning everyone gathered as much as they needed. And when the sun grew hot, it melted away. And on the 6th day, they gathered twice as much, 2 omers, 6 million pounds, or 12 million pounds, 2 omers for each person. And the leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses. Then he said to them, this is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is to be a day of Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. You've got what you need. Now let's set aside some time. He's provided for you. Now let's take it easy for a second. This is so hard for us. See, that word holy, it's a word called kadosh, and it means holiness. We think of holy as a hierarchy a lot of times. It means holy, and we think of holiness being like a hierarchy. Who's holier than who? You know, who's better than who? That's how we scale things. This person's holy, this person's not. But holiness isn't meant to be a hierarchy situation. It's actually just a separate thing. It means to have a set apart time. Kadosh means set apart. It doesn't mean better than or worse than. It means just set apart. It's just different, right? Did you ever see that on The Office? There was a moment where Andy and Dwight were trying to figure out who was the second in command of the office. And they come to Michael, and they're like, who gets paid more? And he goes, it's not about who gets paid more. It's just different. Which didn't answer the question at all because he's Michael Scott. But that's exactly what this word means. It doesn't mean who's above who. It means it's just different. It's just separate. It's a separate moment. And God's saying, I want you to separate your moments. I want you to have space. I want you to have a separate moment. It's not a better moment or a worse than moment, because that's what we do with holiness all the time, is we try to work our way up. We try to say what we can work for is how we achieve holiness. He's saying, no, that's not what it is. It's just set apart. It's just separate. And that's what your day should look like. It should be a separate moment from the other ones. And we need those separate moments, or else our days, they just bleed together and we get confused and they just become mush in our minds, and nothing is sacred and nothing is special and nothing is set apart. It happens to us way too often. When we lived in Washington, we lived out in Washington State, I remember when we first got there, it was dark, and it was just always dark. The clouds cover, actually Bellingham, the town we lived in, has the most cloudy days per year of any town in America over 50,000 people in population. The most cloudy days. We had over 300 days a year every year of clouds. You just didn't see the sun. I would Google pictures of it to remember what it looked like. I set my screensaver as that occasionally to be like, oh, look at that sun. In fact, when we moved to Florida, one of the first times we walked outside, my daughter, she goes, whoa. She goes, Daddy, what's wrong with the sky? I was like, that's what's right with the sky, honey. That's the way it's supposed to look. We were so used to clouds. It was so dark. And when my daughter was born, it was December. I actually went to the doctor around that time because my days were just getting melded together. I was working crazy hours because I couldn't tell when the sun was coming up, couldn't tell when it was going down. It just didn't matter. So I would just go to work and be like, I'm just here until whenever, because it doesn't matter. I can't go home. We're not going to go outside and play. We're not going to go do something fun because it's just dark all the time. And so I kind of just got used to that lifestyle. And I went to my doctor at one point and I said, I'm getting really tired all the time. And she was like, are you taking vitamin D? And I was like a pill of that or something? She was like, yeah, they make pills for it. Do you take that? And I was like, no. Why would I take that? And she was like, because it's the vitamin you're lacking when you're not out in the sun. You need to start taking vitamin D. And I was like, I have to take pills to make up for the sun? Like, who lives here? Why would you do that to yourself? So I started taking these pills, and our daughter was born right around that time, and she was born in December. She was born in late December, and it was dark. It was a dark time of the year, and I remember when we were trying to sleep train her, how difficult it was, because the days and the nights, they just meld together. And we had to make a specific point to wake up every morning and turn on every light in the house and make it bright and cheery and look like it's daytime. It's synthetically daytime. Wake up, this is daytime. And then when it was nighttime, it was very easy. We just turned off the lights, and it was very dark outside, and we would put her back to bed. But we had to make it so clear the difference between day and night for her so that her body would respond to it, so that she could start to understand, even from an infant age, what day and night is, what new is, what's different is, and what set apart moments really look like. And for us, we have to do the same thing sometimes spiritually. We have to guard ourselves, or we have to make time to just rest and allow God to be enough, allow God to provide what we lack. This has been, in this sermon, it may be more for me than it is for you, this study, because this is something I struggle with every single day. It's something I really have a hard time doing. I think if we're honest with ourselves, this might be one of the commandments that we break the most, is to keep the Sabbath holy, if we're honest with ourselves. Keep it set apart. Because this is so difficult for us in our society, in our culture. This is so hard for us to do. When we decided to join into planning a church, I knew there were going to be uncomfortable things. I knew there were going to be some times where I was going to have to rely on God to do certain things for me. I knew that was going to happen. I knew there were going to be times where I'd have to go, you know what, God, I'm not really sure where this paycheck is coming from. And there have been times like that. And God has provided every single time. But for some reason, that wasn't my biggest fear. I knew there were going to be some times that were just going to be really challenging, where I would have to go through hard things, and it would be personally stretching. And those weren't my greatest fears. The thing that I've struggled with personally the most, and maybe you're in the same boat, is allowing myself to say, you know what? I'm done working, and God's going to provide. He's going to still provide even when I haven't worked for it. He's going to make up what I lack. That's so hard for me to do. I'm sure it's hard for you to do too. Is to say, you know what, I'm going to rest. And the truth is, rest is an act of reliance. when we choose to rest in him, we are choosing to rely on his provision, on his favor. We're choosing to do that when we rest. We're allowing ourselves to say, you know what, I have done all I can do. Now it's time for God to make up the difference of what I lack. It's why we all get mad every Sunday when we decide to try to go to Chick-fil-A, right? Because every Sunday is the day you crave Chick-fil-A, right? And that's the day that you drive in and you're like, oh, right, shoot, they're closed, you know? It's because we have to choose sometimes to say, you know what, my act of rest is an act of reliance. That God is going to be enough, that he is going to provide enough, that he's going to take care of me. He's going to provide for us, not because of how we perform, but because of his presence. Because we are present with him in that time. I don't think Sabbath has to look like a formulaic or a ritualistic thing. I don't think it has to look like that. I think it's just setting apart times that are different from other times. Having those spaces where you know something holy is going on, something different is going on, something set apart is going on, and your life suddenly is not all just one big mush. It's suddenly separate moments that are happening. And you're allowing yourself to rest, recharge, restore yourself, and get back to your relationship with God. This week, if you don't do that regularly, I would encourage you to even just take a few hours, a few minutes, even if that's all you can do, of putting a phone down, of turning it off even. Like, the world worked before them even. I don't know if you knew that. Like, most of the world still happened before phones. You can turn them off. You can turn them, just put them somewhere else. Have some time where maybe you just spend some time literally just resting and acting in obedience to what God's called you to do. Don't think of that as laziness. Rest is an act of reliance, not an act of laziness, an act of reliance on God, that he will still provide for you. He set it up with the Israelites then. I would encourage you, as we start the new year, as you try to hit the ground running, as everybody has a million things they want to accomplish, make sure you make time for rest. Make sure you make time for Sabbath this week. Give it a shot. Let me know how it goes. If it's a train wreck, if somehow it doesn't happen and somehow God doesn't provide what you were supposed to have during that time, then let me know. Seriously, I'd love to hear that story too. But if it does go well, let me hear that story as well, because I think it's so important for us. Let's stand together. We're going to sing as we close this time. I would really encourage you, schedule out time, block out time, rest time this week. And let's pray together as we sing. God, I pray this morning that for those of us that have just been so busy and we just hit the ground running every morning, and from the time our feet hit the floor to the time our head hits the pillow at night, God, we just sometimes get so busy that we forget to rely on you. We forget how big you are and how much you will provide for us if we allow you to. God, I thank you for this huge example as early as in Exodus, where you set up this story of huge provision, of manna that's just so abundant and so fulfilling. You say that you're going to be enough. You make a promise that you're going to be enough, and then you come through for it. And God, some of us, we've been in lifestyles that are just unhealthy. Some of us, we come out of a place much like Egypt where we are just tired and we are worn out and we are run down. And God, I thank you that you don't judge us on our performance. You judge us on our presence with you, just our time with you. So God, this week, allow us just the space and the freedom to rest and rely on you alone. Thank you for this time. I thank you for this time that each person in this room has set apart just to come and be with you and just to have some space. I pray that we would take that out of this room and have it in our own lives, in our own homes, with our own families, so we would have an act of reliance on you. Praise things in your name.